Welcome everybody to our free facilitation webinar of today, Transformational Strategy from Trepidation to Unlocked. The meeting is recording, so you'll receive a link to the recording later. My name is Martin Gilbreth. Thank you all for joining. Delighted to have you all with us, and thank you also to Sunny and Bill for being with me today. Sunny and Bill, would you like to introduce yourselves briefly? Sunny? Oh, you're muted, Sunny. Go ahead.
Clicky finger problem. I'm here in Denver, Colorado, where it's still dark outside, just barely. And I work with the Virtual Facilitation Collaborative and have known Martin and Bill for a very long time. Great colleagues, and I'm happy to be here. I'll turn it to Bill.
Good. I'm Bill Staples from Toronto, Canada, and I've worked with ICA, Institute of Cultural Affairs, sort of all of my life, and also was assigned about 8 years ago to gather information and write a book on strategy and on the strategic planning process. And so I got to speak with lots of wonderful colleagues around the world in order to get that book written. And I'm complete.
Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you, for joining, and thanks especially Sunny and Bill. I'm very excited to have them both with me today as very experienced facilitators and very experienced in ICA's top methods. Bill, as I think you probably know, is author of the book Transformational Strategy, so thank you, Bill, for the title for this webinar. So the aims of this series of webinars is to share and learn something about facilitation and ICA's top facilitation methodology, in particular, the technology of participation. Each of these free webinars is a 1-hour interactive online session that aims to also give you an experience of virtual facilitation, as well as content on whatever the topic may be. As I say, the session will be recorded, and we'll be sharing the recording and the outputs after the session. There are 93 of you registered for this session today. You can see an image to the top right of where you're all from. Not all of you are actually here. We've got, or not all of those registered are actually here. It looks like there's 25 of us so far, which is not a bad proportion, I think. The title of this session, Transformational Strategy, is a title that I also used for a blog post about facilitation of strategic planning with an international humanitarian NGO in Geneva a few years ago. And during this session, I'll be sharing a presentation on that strategic planning process and sharing something about ICA's top participatory strategic planning process. The presentation I first shared at the Moscow Facilitators Conference in 2014, so you'll see some references to that in the presentation. But we've added a couple of slides to the presentation to bring it a bit up to date and to take it a little bit further, including an example of another more recent case study with Oxfam in Lebanon last year. Thank you all for introducing yourselves in the chat pod to the right. Please continue to do that. I can see that most of us, about half, say that we're somewhat experienced in online facilitation and facilitation more generally. Most of us, 70% are in Europe, but we've got 20% in North America and 1 or 2 in Asia at the moment. So great to have you all with us. Let me move us swiftly on to our presentation. Please continue to use the general chat pod on the right to introduce yourselves, to share questions and comments. I'm going to talk you through the presentation in hopefully about 10 or 15 minutes. And excuse me, I see that we're on the wrong slide, so I'll take us back to the beginning. There we go, back at the beginning. I shall allow plenty of time after the presentation for questions, comments and reflections from all of you. We'll also be asking all of you some questions as well about your own experience of facilitating strategic planning. So look forward to hearing some of your experiences. So as I say, this is a case study of top participatory strategic planning with an international humanitarian agency in Geneva, first presented at the 2014 Moscow Facilitators Conference. In the presentation, I'll be sharing a little bit about ICA's technology of participation methodology as a whole, and the participatory strategic planning method in particular. I'll be sharing the case study from IDMC, the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center in Geneva, and also something of an additional case study of Oxfam in Lebanon, case studies of the method in action. I'll be inviting Bill to speak to an additional slide for this webinar on the strategic planning process and ICA's spiral curriculum from the 60s. And then we'll be sharing some links to resources and support before we go into our discussion and questions afterwards. So a little bit about me. You probably know a little bit about me already. I'm former Chief Executive and an Associate of ICA UK, currently also serving as President of ICA International. ICA is the Institute of Cultural Affairs, an international NGO in about 40 countries that has developed and refined the technology of participation facilitation methodology over many years all over the world. I'm also very much involved with the International Association of Facilitators and accredited as a certified professional facilitator by IAF. So ICA's facilitation approach, the technology of participation, just a few words about that at the beginning. You'll see the underlying values on the left of this slide of the approach. But the methodology is very much biased towards, or designed, if you like, for inclusive participation, teamwork, creativity, action and ownership, and reflection and learning. The methods are all designed to enable those things, and it's when you're seeking those things that ICA's methodology really come into its own. Depending on who you ask, there are 5 core methods and tools, or 5 or 6 methods and tools of the technology of participation, or even up to 60, depending on how you classify them. The core ones that we'll be referring to here are the consensus workshop method and the strategic planning process. If you're interested to learn more about rational and experiential aims and focus conversation, I'll refer you to my free facilitation webinar of January, where you'll find the recording on my website. We focused very much on that. The consensus workshop method is one of the foundations of the strategic planning process, and one of the foundational methods of the technology of participation. It's a 5-stage process which is specifically designed to enable a facilitator to help a group to build consensus, to reach shared agreement on a topic or a question. It starts with what we call a focus question. So, for example, you'll see the first of the workshops in the strategic planning process is what we call the practical vision workshop. The focus question for that is, what do we want to see in place in 3 to 5 years' time as a result of implementing our strategy? So whatever the focus question might be, it's the question that guides and frames the workshop. The second stage of the workshop method is to invite everybody participating to brainstorm individually, first of all, as many responses as they can in response to that focus question. And that provides the data for the workshop and the basis for the consensus that comes later. Typically, we'll have people brainstorm individually, first of all, and then share some of their ideas in small groups or pairs, depending how many people in the group, and write some of the best ideas on cards, which will then take up a few at a time to a sticky wall, or use some other means to display people's ideas on a wall where everybody can see them. And then the facilitator will ask the group to identify which ideas are similar in some respect or another, and cluster the similar ideas together as a way of beginning to discern where the consensus in the group lies, and beginning to build synergies between the ideas. And then the facilitator will ask the group to name each of the clusters when all of the ideas are up on the wall and all of the ideas have been clustered. We'll ask the group to name each of the clusters in such a way that names the consensus emerging from the group. we then close the workshop process with a few words of reflection, or to confirm the resolve, if you like. So this consensus workshop process forms the basis, or one of the bases, of the top strategic planning process. The strategic planning process is a method, a complex adaptation, if you like, or a complex application of top methods, specifically designed to help a group plan its desired future, from where it would like to be in the future, what its desired future looks like, through to who's going to do what from Monday morning, if you like, to make that happen. So it's a 5-stage process, starting with preparation and design of the process, or design of the application of the basic method, and then a series of increasingly adapted variations of the consensus workshop method that I've just outlined there. The practical vision workshop, as I said, as I gave an example, that's an opportunity for the group to articulate its consensus vision of where it would like to be in the future, typically 3 to 5 years ahead. Underlying contradictions is switching the perspective from the future to the present and asking the group, what is it in current reality that represents an obstacle or a block to the vision being realized? And we try to dig deep into the underlying root causes of those blocks and obstacles in order to name what we call underlying contradictions. In particular, how does the group and members of the group, how do they contribute to sustaining those blocks and obstacles? If you can identify those root causes at all, that gives you a really powerful opportunity to make a difference, to design strategic interventions that will actually address those contradictions and help to realize the vision. So the third stage of the process is what we call strategic directions, which is looking for 3 to 5 years ahead, typically, looking at what sort of directions we would need to take in order to move to address the contradictions and help to realize the vision over that period. And then the final workshop is focused implementation, looking first of all at 1 year ahead and what specific accomplishments are required in the first year to demonstrate sufficient progress in those strategic directions. And then in the first quarter, who's going to do what week by week in order to make that progress in the first year. The whole process is shown as a spiral because it's intended to be not just a one-off exercise in producing a plan, but really an exercise in building team consensus, commitment, and clarity to help make the plan work in practice. So there's an assumption really that the people involved in the planning will be involved in the implementation, and also that the people who will be involved in the implementation will be involved in the planning. So it's a way of launching a participatory learning and action process, if you like, to enable a group to get better over time at both learning, planning, and implementation. Please do stop me, by the way, raise your hand if you have any questions you'd like to raise during this brief presentation. I'll come back and look at your chat questions in a moment. We're going to move on now to the case study. And let me just check and see whether any of my colleagues from IDMC are here with us today. Alfredo and Claire had said that they might be able to join us, but it looks like they haven't. So I'll go right ahead. It's actually World Refugee Day today, so it's a very topical day to be looking at the question of displacement of all sorts. IDMC, the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, is an international humanitarian agency based in Geneva, as you can see, established with a UN mandate to monitor internal displacement, that is displacement within nation states rather than across. It had been going for 15 or so years when I was approached to facilitate for them 2 or 3 years ago. It had a staff of 35 in Geneva. It had a new director. It had also evolved over time from monitoring displacement due to conflict to also monitoring displacement due to natural disaster. There had been various other changes as well, which led to the sense that it was time to develop a new strategic plan, get people involved. So I was invited to design and facilitate the process. I was actually recommended by a member of staff of IDMC who had participated in something in the UK some years earlier using top methods. And so the process began in the preparation and design phase with a consultation visit early September, where I was able to meet with the director and the head of communications and most of the staff in various larger and smaller meetings to help me and them better understand the context of the planning process and the challenges they were seeking to address by it, to tailor the strategic planning process into an approach particularly designed for their needs, and to clarify the aims and the design of the process. We also planned a series of regular Skype calls with the design team between September and the event in October, and took the opportunity to work out the practical details of venue and catering and that sort of thing to get us ready for the event. It was conceived as a week-long planning event. They had a tradition of meeting for a week for participatory planning. The particular challenge of this year was to embed a change process and restructuring that had been recommended and agreed a couple of years earlier but hadn't really taken root, and also to respond to various changes in their external environment, and to capitalize on the fresh opportunity for a new start, having a new director in particular. They were looking to come up with what they called IDMC version 2, 20 odd years on from their founding after all these changes that they'd been through. So the approach that I proposed was based very much on ICA's technology of participation and the strategic planning method. We were very clear at the outset that we couldn't be comprehensive to try and address all the challenges and questions they would like to address, but we would try and be sufficiently comprehensive to address most of them and at least come up with a plan as to how the rest would be addressed over time. We were very keen to make the process inclusive and appreciative, to make sure that everybody was involved and that we would appreciate what was working rather than simply focus on what wasn't and what needed to be fixed. And also that it would be very forward-looking and intentional, that we'd be looking at what we were trying to achieve and how to get there, rather than simply where we were coming from and what was possible from here. Transparency and accountability were also important to them as well, so that was very much built into the design. The rational and experiential aims of the process, I shan't talk you through all of them here, but just to say, if you're not familiar with the terminology, one of the basics of the technology of participation really is that we look at the aims of any process, both in terms of what we call rational aim, in other words, what the group needs to know or understand or decide, in this case, essentially to build a strategic plan and address certain vital questions of strategy and policy, but also what we call experiential aims, in other words, how do we want the process to impact on the group and to affect the individuals and the group as a whole, which in this case was particularly to do with building shared commitment, confidence and trust for a new way forward together. So what that looked like in practice for the week was something like this. We essentially spent the best part of the first day on the preparation and design phase, warming people up. We used World Cafe to introduce the planning cycle and get people to reflect on where they've come from and what their hopes and aspirations were for the week. If I just show you how this relates to the strategic planning process as well. The next couple of sessions, the journey of change and the current strategic context, also part of the planning and design, or rather part of the preparation process. We used the top historical scan method for the journey of change and the wave exercise to reflect on the strategic context and how that had changed. And then we used the top focus conversation method to reflect on IDMC's mission and values and to clarify the focus question for the planning process. More of that in just a few minutes. And then we had essentially the best part of a day for each of the first 3 workshops of the strategic planning process: vision, contradictions, and strategies. But built into that, we had they had a social outing already planned for the Tuesday afternoon. They went bowling. which is a good time for them to get away on a high after coming up with their vision. And it also gave me a good opportunity to reflect and regroup before going into the contradictions exercise with them on day 3. Also, we introduced a participatory exercise to reflect on strengths and resources that they had to draw on to address their contradictions at the end of Wednesday before going into strategic directions on Thursday. They were very keen also to have time to look at the implications of their new strategy for existing donor commitments before going into implementation planning. So we allowed some time for that at the end of Thursday. And then one of the key questions they needed to address as a group was the implications of including and integrating natural disaster displacement into their monitoring and analysis work, in addition to displacement due to conflict. And so we had a particular time allowed for that on the Friday before going into clarifying SMART objectives for the first year and operational plans for the first quarter. So I'll just walk you very quickly through some images of what the sticky wall looked like at the end of these to give you a little bit of a flavor of the process. In case any of you are not familiar with a sticky wall, it's not essential for ICA's technology of participation, but it is very convenient. It's basically a strip of nylon sprayed with repositionable spray mount, which acts like a giant post-it and means that you can use regular paper and stick people's ideas directly on the wall so that everybody can see their own ideas and see each other's ideas. This historical scan exercise is a way of brainstorming the unfolding history of a group, in this case, key events and milestones in the history of IDMC over a period of time and in the context of its wider environment in the top row and people's own involvement, individuals' own involvement in the bottom row. So essentially it's a brainstorm exercise, brainstorming and plotting on a timeline these events and milestones. And then we use the focus conversation method as a way of reflecting and drawing insights, discerning trends, and so forth. The wave exercise that we used for analyzing the strategic context in this planning process uses a very simple metaphor of a wave. You can see the image in the middle there. Imagine using the metaphor of a wave as if the changing strategic context of the organization is like waves lapping across us. And what we brainstorm in this exercise is trends in the strategic environment. And then we plot them on the sticky wall according to where they sit on the wave, whether the trend is just emerging on the far horizon, or rather whether it's just visible on the far horizon, whether it's emerging or beginning to have an impact, whether it's peaking and at its maximum impact, or whether it's dying and beginning to have less impact. And that's just a way of brainstorming and reflecting on what's going on in the environment around us. So both of those exercises on Monday were a way of bringing us all on the same page, if you like, laying the foundations for the planning process. And then to conclude, yes, Sunny.
Simon has a question about, I'm not sure if you want to address it here, but I want to bring it to your attention, about how did the session strengths and resources help the process between the contradictions and the strategic directions? What was the added value? And
thank you, Simon.
And why there and not between strategic directions and operational planning?
I tell you what, Simon, I'll come to that when the slide comes up that shows the group doing that, which is coming up in just a couple of moments. Thank you for the question. To complete the preparation and design phase, we clarified the focus question of the planning process, which essentially is the question that the planning process is designed to answer. So we had various drafts and used the focus conversation method to finalize the question. And in this case, it was this: how can IDMC strengthen its unique role as a global monitor and evidence-based advocate to best contribute to prevention, protection, during and durable solutions for people affected by internal displacement? So you'll see that frames and guides the entire planning process and helps the planning process be a little bit more focused as a result. The practical vision workshop looked a little bit like this after people had brainstormed and clustered their ideas on the sticky wall here in columns. What do we want to see in place in 3 years from now as a result of our work was the question that that workshop answered. And then the underlying contradictions workshop, the question was what's blocking us from moving towards our vision? And then we clustered according to the underlying root cause of those blocks and asked ourselves what strengths and resources do we have to address the blocks to our vision? So Simon, the advantage of asking that question at this point was twofold, I think, at least. It was partly because the group were very concerned to take an appreciative approach, and it felt very important in the design phase that we did take an appreciative approach. They had, as most groups do, that invite a facilitator to help them, they had lots of frustrations about all sorts of things, lots of challenges that they were trying to deal with that they were hoping this planning process would help with. And I think they had a long history of struggling with dealing with this stuff and not getting satisfaction. So I particularly wanted to give them an opportunity to think about what was going well, what they were good at, what strengths and resources they have, particularly after spending the best part of a day digging deep into what all the obstacles were. The other reason for doing it at this point is to inform the strategic directions workshop that came after, and also to make sure that we didn't end and go away at the end of day 3 thinking just of blocks and obstacles and contradictions. I wanted to be able to send them away at the end of the day on a positive note, with a sense of what they were capable of and what they had to look forward to the next day, rather than simply a sense of what they were struggling against.
Thank you. It's clear.
Hope that answers your question. Let me know if not.
Yes, it's clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Just a few more slides before we take more questions. The strategic directions workshop, you'll see in the image top left of the screen, there's another image of a strategic planning course. The strategic directions workshop looks a little bit like this. We cluster practical actions to address the blocks. That's what people brainstorm, and we cluster them according to strategic intent, and then cluster the clusters to indicate a sense of strategic direction. And the reason for that is because if you came up with 8, 9, or 10 strategic directions, which is a typical number of clusters you might get in a workshop, that many directions is essentially no strategic direction at all. You want to come up with a very small number, usually 2, 3, or 4 strategic directions from this workshop in order to give a sense of direction and focus to the strategy for the 3 to 5 years of implementation. So that's how that workshop looks. Before going into implementation, we did a little creativity exercise to get people thinking and feeling in a creative implementation mode. I asked them, if your implementation plan were a fantasy vehicle, how might it look? And there's some of the fantasy vehicles that they came up with in their teams. We had a lot of fun hearing about those and what were the advantages of each. And then focused implementation asked the question, what will be our smart accomplishments for the year, and what will be our implementation steps for the first quarter? And at this point, they met in their various work teams in order to work that out. I also came back with them 3 months later to facilitate a first quarterly review, where we used World Cafe again to review overall how the strategy was going in the first quarter. We then met in the work teams to review in more detail what had happened relative to their 3-month plan. We revised the SMART objectives a little bit for year 1, which in retrospect we felt hadn't been quite as smart as they could be, and then came up with operational plans for quarter 2. Let me just check and see if there's any sign yet of Claire or Alfredo who might have been with us on this call. No, they're not yet. So let me just move ahead to the feedback. This was Claire and Alfredo who hired me for the contract, and the feedback that they gave shortly after on LinkedIn. It was Claire's comment about trepidation and unlock, which of course inspired the title of the blog post that led to this this presentation and this webinar, which is very gratifying and a great example, I think, of the experiential aim and the experiential impact that such a process can have. I usually say to clients and to groups at the outset of such a process that this isn't just about producing a plan, it's really about trying to make a difference to you as a group, to your own sense of capacity to bring about the kind of future that you envisage for yourselves. So it's about enabling a group to unlock, essentially, particularly from a sense that if it has a sense that it's not capable, or if it has a sense that it's blocked from achieving its aims, it's really enabling a group to unlock and feel more capable and to overcome any obstacles within itself and among themselves. So it was very gratifying to get this feedback. Briefly, if you don't have 5 days, as many clients don't, as many groups don't, just to say that it is possible to do strategic planning in a much shorter time under certain conditions. And typically I would suggest 2.5 days for a strategic planning process for a group of maybe 15 or 20. In this case, a small social enterprise in Somerset, I facilitated strategic planning with them a couple of times over the last few years, and each time we were able to do three workshops in one long day, vision, contradictions, and strategic directions, partly because it was a smaller group. Most of the group were not involved on a full-time basis. Most of them were board members and other stakeholders. And so the stakes were less high, really, which meant consensus was easier to reach. Also, one of the staff of the team was an experienced top facilitator himself, familiar with the method, and he was able to do a lot of the work of preparation and design with the group before I showed up for the day, and he also led the implementation planning with the group after I had led the day. So in some circumstances, it can be possible to do 3 workshops in a day like that. As another example, though, at the other end of the scale, there are also occasions where even a week may not be enough. And you'll see on my website, if you follow the link, there's a case study of another strategic planning process I did around a year to 18 months ago. This actually came as a result of the IDMC event. One of the participants in that took up a new job with Oxfam in Lebanon, arrived in post to discover that as country director she was going to have to not only lead Oxfam in Lebanon responding to a very complex and demanding environment in terms of responding to the Syria crisis across the border just a few miles away, but also to lead a complex and demanding change process to help Oxfam in Lebanon live up to the new global Oxfam strategy for what they call a one-country strategy, 2020 vision, I think they call it. So this was a process that sought to engage 150 diverse stakeholders from multiple Oxfam affiliates in Lebanon, different locations within Lebanon, and different functional teams within Lebanon and within the region and in the UK as well. So we came up with a process that involved 3 trips, originally intended as 4 trips actually for me, but we did 3 trips with some orientation, consultation, and design in the first trip, including an orientation day with a cross-section of the 150 staff. The main event was a 4-day event with a World Cafe consultation for all 150 stakeholders on the first day, where we asked the questions for the vision, contradictions, and strategic directions and generated lots of data from all 150 people. And then the cross-section group of about 45 met for the following 3 days to workshop all of their data together and to build consensus from the data generated by the 150. The cross-section group were also had an opportunity to bring their own particular perspectives to bear from the particular teams to particular locations and particular affiliates to make sure those particular perspectives were taken into account. So that enabled us to weave together the input from 150 into the strategic framework, if you like. And then in the final trip, I came back and did implementation planning workshops with particular teams on how they would integrate this new strategic framework into their own project and program design and operational work planning. I also did some capacity building, some facilitation training for the various teams. So there's an example of a much more complex and longer term process as well. I'm going to hand over now to Bill for just a few moments to take us a little bit deeper. Bill, would you like to speak to this spiral curriculum concept?
Sure. Let me thank you very much, Martin, and also for the examples that you gave. What I wanted to show everyone here is that this process has been developed over about a 40-year period. And what you see today in terms of tools and methods and processes actually came out of something much deeper than that in the early 70s. So early on, for instance, in the 70s, ICA had two major strategies. One was to do community development work all over the world to get people to work together, even though they may be enemies or even though they may not like each other in the community, to help transform those communities and make them more livable and to spread that around the world. And the second strategy was to work with very large companies in order for them to take on more social responsibility because they were making huge amounts of money that could be used for this community development work. So we had these two different things, which you see at the very bottom was like a lifestyle issue. We were out to transform local communities and to waken up companies to their responsibility. And so that's a sort of a lifestyle that we were trying to promote at that time. And out of that, there was a philosophy attached to that. You'll see this first thing called limits and possibilities. This is very much to do with the possibilities, has to do with, what could the future look like? What could it be? Which is very much a question of vision. And the limits really are, how far can you go, or what's going to stop you, which is very much to do with contradictions. But also, the style that we wanted to promote was that of heavy affirmation of whatever difficulties you had and whatever your life was, and whatever difficulties you had, you would affirm people. You could affirm an entire community, an entire company, you could entire individuals affirm that their life was worthwhile and that they could make a huge difference. We were also out to promote that of being responsible for the world, inclusive responsibility, and have a vocation of service. So these are the sort of philosophy that was behind all of ICA's work that we were building these methods for. You'll see a little higher up there, the values we have held all through these 40 years is that of comprehensive concern. And you'll see that when you get people brainstorming a vision, they will brainstorm all sorts of things that the CEO might not be interested in, or they might brainstorm all sorts of things that a local mayor might not be interested in. That's the comprehensive nature of the work. We want people to be globally aware, to see how their strategic plan is affecting other people and getting more stakeholders involved. We're very interested in the value of historical perspective, of seeing not that you're simply trying to make things better today, but you're trying to shift society so that you're making a better society, not just a better organization. So then when you go up further, you'll see that all of those things together started to create the strategic planning process. And when you saw the spiral that Martin showed, The vision element, it's like people do not spend most of their days thinking about the future. They spend their days behind their desk thinking about the next hour or the next day or what can I do today. So pulling people out of that and having them think about the long-term future is in itself a revolution. Having people project outwards is something that does not happen very often, and therefore that's why it's so important in strategic planning to do that. Looking at contradictions, it's like there are always systemic problems that are blocking a group from moving ahead, and those are often of their own making. They have created something that worked for 5-10 years and now is actually blocking them from moving ahead. And so this is now the care and the courage that you see down the lifestyle coming to play, because it takes courage for a facilitator to stand up in front of people and ask them to think about, you know, what is blocking them and how do they participate in that block. It takes courage because you must sometimes have to stand up to a CEO or to political leaders in order to, you know, pull off, you know, the clothes of the emperor. Make sure that people see that there are other ways of operating than just the one that's current. So those all gave rise, all of that philosophy and values and processes gave rise to methods, and finally to the tools that you see today in the strategic planning. I would think the strategy one process that you see there and method is probably a very important one, because it's when people have a picture of the future, they have a picture of what could happen in the future, and they know what they're up against. That's when they can be strategic. People cannot be strategic unless they look forward and unless they look inward to what they can do and what's blocking them. And that is almost the definition of strategy. And what we found is that the top strategic planning has less to do with making things better than has to do with actually transforming individuals' perspective on the world and transforming how they can operate. So, and that has given rise to all the tools that you'll see up there, and there's many, many more tools as well. So the strategic planning, the participatory, top participatory strategic planning is based on a whole philosophy, lifestyle, and values. And when you use those methods, when you use strategic planning, you are promoting those values and that philosophy. So I'm hoping that you'll all have a chance to perhaps use participatory strategic planning in order to help people transform the situations that you're in. Just the last comment I want to make is that there is a place you can look online, and I've just put it into the bottom right-hand corner, top-facilitation.com/programs. And if you go to that site, you'll see about 300 places where the strategic planning has been used. And this goes all the way from international banks at the very highest level, all the way down to the village level, where people are just trying to get by and trying to make things better for their kids over time. So if you'd like to visit topfacilitation.com/programs, you will see examples of all of these, of at least 300 of them. But even though the strategic planning has been used probably 10,000 times over the world, throughout the world in the past 40 years. Thank you very much, Martin, for giving me the chance to sort of give a little bit of history to people about where the method comes from. And I know that that Sunny could do the same, because she has a history. She has an incredible history both on the private sector as well.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Bill. That's great. I spoke longer than I intended to, so I do want to move us quickly to questions. You can see in front of us some of the resources on ICA's top methods, including Transformational Strategy, Bill's book on the strategic planning process on the right. We happen to have ICA Ukraine and my client in Russia on this as well, because this slide was first prepared for the Moscow conference. But let's take a few questions now. Please do raise your hand and speak. If you have a microphone, we'd love to hear your voice. I'll take one. I see there's one or two questions already in the general chat pod on the right, so we can respond to those if we don't hear any voice comments. But please do raise your hand. I'm looking particularly at Simon and Robert, who asked questions in the chat. Would you like to speak to your question? Yes, Simon, please go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yes. I was wondering, Martin, nowadays in a lot of consultancies, they ask in connection with a strategic planning facilitation to draw up a strategic document. How was that in your case? Did you just document the workshop results and that was used as a document, or did they hire an external consultant or a communication specialist to make a separate strategic document?
What I did was simply document the process, and that's what I generally do. I generally resist any invitation to go beyond that, because I see my role as being facilitating participation and feeding back people's own views to them in a way that they have access to it and can work from it. To do any more to interpret or build on their feedback is more than I would want to do as a facilitator. Also because, well, in some cases you may need a more elaborate strategy document for some purpose or another. However, I also try to emphasize to my clients and the groups that I work with is that the real value of the strategic planning process and a facilitated strategic planning process is that it builds a foundation for implementation. And actually, it's all about implementation. It's not all about the document. A document, a verbatim transcript of what they wrote and agreed on the day should be enough for them to do implementation. If they need something more than that, then of course they can produce something more than that. But I generally would resist that kind of invitation myself.
Yeah, it's clear. Thank you.
Thank you. I saw Robert asked a question. Would you like? Do you have a microphone, Robert? Let me. No, you don't. So Robert's asking Bill whether it's correct that the ends but not the means of PSP are similar to Theory U. Would you like to respond to that, Bill?
Well, there are similarities because Theory U does take a long historical perspective. So you'll probably see, if you look carefully at the strategic plan, you'll see some elements that are related to Theory U, but the journey that we used to create the processes were done in the 70s, and I think that there's similarities all over the world. So it's likely that you'll find similarities with Theory U as well as with other types of philosophies as well.
Thank you. And for any who aren't familiar, Theory U is a methodology and the title of a book by Otto Scharmer, which we could share in the chat pod there. I see Robert also asked earlier, does PSP need to be done in a continuous time window, or could it be done just as well in, say, weekly recurring meetings? It certainly can be done in a series of events rather than just one event, and I gave an example of that with Oxfam. Typically, I would try and minimize the number of different events. Typically, I would do it in no more than 2 or 3 events. I think any more than that, you might lose the experiential impact of it. I haven't tried spreading it over a large number of events, but I think it would have greater impact over a shorter time window. What would you say, Sunny or Bill? Do you have any experience of that?
This is Sunny, and I find the shorter windows, what do you call it? A sort of a pressure cooker environment develops where one thing builds on the next very powerfully, and that's why I prefer to do it in a short time frame. You have to spend so much time getting people back to where they left it when you come back to the next meeting if it's spread very far.
Yeah,
I think just yesterday and the day before, I was doing this actual process with 16 people who are architects. But on the other hand, there are times when you'll do strategic planning for instance 30 different focus groups on visioning, and that might take a 3-month period. And then having the input from that, also get input on contradictions, and also input on strategies. And so, I've done it many times where the window would be like a 5-month period, ending off with a huge implementation group sitting in a gymnasium in a school, figuring out how they're going to implement everything. So if it's a very large group, you can either do it in the compressed point, if you have a big enough room to hold everybody, or you can spread it out over time with lots of smaller focus groups feeding into the bigger one.
Thank you. I can see we have another question from Simon. Thank you for that, Simon. We'll come to that in a moment, but we have just 10 minutes left, so I do want to hear something from all of you also. We'd like to put some questions to you as well as take questions from you. So please do, all of you, feel free to type in the 2 fresh chat pods that you see in front of you now. What's worked well in your experience of facilitated planning? Perhaps you have experience of ICA's top methodology applied to strategic planning. I know that at least a few of you have been in planning sessions that I've facilitated. Maybe you facilitated strategic planning yourself, or maybe you've used other methods or approaches, or maybe you've been in a participant or facilitated strategic planning, or done strategy planning other ways. Please do let us know what's worked well in your experience, and also what have been some of the challenges, and perhaps how have you approached those challenges, or how have they been addressed. Feel free to type in there, and we'll, if any of you would like to comment verbally on what you see, please do raise your hand and speak. I'm just looking at Simon Colbright's question: how do you integrate discussions on behavior change in strategic planning? What methods do you use to discuss behavior change? Theatre or video is more appropriate if you want to have behavior change. What I've done, Simon, and I think what you're referring to here is the importance of touching people's reflective level, if you like, in ORID terminology during the process. And I think you're absolutely right, if that's what you mean, that you do need elements of the process to do that. A good example in the textbook version of strategic planning, the way we teach it on the course, is the dramatization exercise that we quite often do at the end of strategic planning, at the end of the strategic directions workshop. And I did that with the IDMC group in Geneva, actually, and I gave them quite some time to come up with a song or a skit or a dramatization to communicate each of the strategic directions in a memorable way. And it was very memorable. One of them happened to have a guitar with him at the venue, and they sang Bob Marley's Redemption song, or rather they rewrote the words to it, and sang about their strategic direction to that tune, which was a very powerful way, I think, of really getting inside what that strategy meant to them. I wonder if Bill or Sonny would like to speak to that, or to any of the other comments we're getting up on the screen.
Thank you.
Well, the behavior change is, I think, key to the transformation part of strategic planning. And the contradictions is where it becomes clear to people that they must change their behavior. The strategy is where they get clear on there are certain approaches that we will have to take in the future that are different than the way we've acted in the past. And then the action planning is the point where they map out the specific changes that they will have to make in their own behaviors, which might be having meetings with people you don't like, or relating with people who are different from you. And it's the action planning where it becomes very clear. And of course, the imaginal education process that ICA uses is embedded right in strategic planning, although most people don't recognize that.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
I know that there's one or two of you in the room today who've been participants in other strategic planning processes that I've facilitated, or other strategic planning processes that have used TOP. I'm not going to out you in case you don't want to speak, but if you would like to speak, I'd love to hear from you. Please raise your hand if you'd like to say a few words about your experience of this process, what difference it made to the group you were a part of. Jill, thank you. Yes, please go ahead. Unmute yourself.
There. Well, Martin worked with a small international group that I'm part of, 6 or 7 people who never had enough time to get together and really learn to work together. So one 3-day session was transformational because the participatory aspect helped the relationships as much or more than helping the process and the questions that we had. So that was very great.
Thank you, Jill, which is a great example of the experiential impact, I think, and the importance of the experiential aim. Very often clients or groups look for a facilitator to achieve what we call the rational aim because they want to make a decision or write a plan or whatever. What makes the process transformational, or what can make the process transformational, is the experiential impact, which is why it's so important to consider the experiential aim at the outset. Yes, Stephen, please go ahead. You'll need to unmute. Oh, Stephen has actually left the room after raising his hand. Maybe. Oh no, there he is. Stephen, you're there, but you're muted. Let me unmute you myself if I can. I don't seem to be able to unmute you, Stephen. Try clicking on the mic button yourself to unmute. I'm sorry, I don't know what's wrong with your mic, Stephen. If you'd like to type your question or your comment in the general chat, please do that. We've got just a couple of minutes left before the hour is up. Thank you for your comments. What worked well? I can see setting outlines from the start. Having 2 or 4 more facilitators with large groups, absolutely. Big headline images, sidebars, and so on. Giving inspiration from the outside world beforehand, creating a safe space. And some of the challenges, getting a management team to actually agree to do something and working out how to run the action planning bit, how much detail to go into, yes. Full system approach for implementation, allowing for emergence, yes, absolutely. So thank you all very much indeed. Our time is almost up. I'm going to move us to our last screen here, and I'll stop the recording in a few moments' time. I don't have to leave, so if you'd like to stay, please feel free to stay and continue to use the general chat pod to raise more questions or to share more comments and reflections on the session there. Please also use the poll pod in the center there to rate today's session. How have you found it? And if you'd like to share contact details in order to connect with each other, please feel free to share them there. You can wait till after the recording stops if you wish. And down in the bottom right, you'll see some web links to further information and resources. You'll receive an email. Everybody who registered for this webinar will receive an email within the next day or so with the outputs of this session. You'll also find news of my next webinar coming up in August, which will be announced shortly on there. You'll see links there also to virtual facilitation training online from ICA UK, to Sunny's organisation, the Virtual Facilitation Collaborative, and to Bill's ICA Associates in Canada. You'll also find a book review of Bill's book, 2 books and 3 methods for facilitating social transformation. That's on my own blog. And if any of you are in reach of Brussels, you'd be very welcome to join me for my own strategic planning training, which I've got coming up next in November in Brussels. So with that, thank you very much indeed again, all of you, for joining. Do join me again in a couple of months' time. And if you'd like to stay after I close the recording, as I say, please feel free to stay on. Thanks also very much indeed to Bill and Sunny for joining me for this session today. I'm now going to close the recording.
And Steve has finally become unmuted.